democracies, because people want to get re-elected, you haven't got that same level of leadership. You've got followership, because we're now all terrorized by the 24-hour media. In the end, you're nothing unless you are working with people, building a team where people just desperately want to get out of bed and come and be part of the enterprise and the sense of forward movement.
So I know that you've been a politician, a diplomat, UN's Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Emergency Relief. But before that, I know you were an entrepreneur. And I know before that, you were born in Tanzania. So let's start there.
All right. Okay, well, as you can see, it was because my father was working in Tanzania, and I am so old, it was then called Tanganyika. And so he was the last ever administrative officer appointed by the old British Overseas Civil Service in the days before independence all took place. So he went out as a 22-year-old in 1955 and got permission specially to marry in his first 3 years. He was already engaged, and I appeared in 1957. So that's how that happened. But we came back, and he left what was then called the Colonial Service, and he joined the alternative Colonial Service, which was Shell Oil. So that's how because he had fluent Swahili, so we came to the north of England, and we spent 6 months in the north of England at one refinery, and Mombasa for another 6 months. We did that until, like all Shell boys, they were sent back to a boarding school aged 7.5 for the next 10 years of education, which meant that they could deploy their people around the world without being worried about whether children might get in the way. And the great thing was, I look back on an idyllic boyhood. I have nothing to complain about. It was wonderful, and living in East Africa was just great. I went to Loreto Convent. By the time I became a Conservative male MP, it was a pretty sort of a unique claim to fame that I had been to a convent. So that's how that was. And then, of course, it was all the usual British school system. So I was very
Tell
lucky.
me first about what was so idyllic about it, that your childhood. What do you remember fondly?
I mean, it was before Mombasa was really built up. So you got up at 6 o'clock, aged 4, 5, 6. You went yourself to the bus. You got the bus to the school, and that was 7 o'clock in the morning. It finished at 12. You came home. Very reluctantly, you had to go and have a nap, and then you were taken to the beach for the rest of the day. And that was it. Fantastic.
I get it. Okay.
So I had no hardship like that, and I'm not going to pretend. But the interesting thing is, when you go to a typical British boarding school, particularly if you come from a family which is not moneyed. I was lucky. I found I had a sufficient talent in music that I got music scholarships, which paid for most of my way through. But you're mixing with a lot of people whose parents have a lot of money, and that can have quite an effect on you, because you're suddenly wanting to aspire to what they're doing, because you just want to mix in, and you know you can't. So you have to find alternative methods. That was just a sort of...
What were your alternative?
Playing music.
Okay. What did you play?
I'm a concert pianist and a cellist, an organist, and a conductor. So I had my orchestra and choir for a while. I'm very lucky, because that's how I met my wife. She was the very first girl into a particular college at Cambridge, and then chose to follow her vocation, which was to nurse elderly people and the dying. And so she's a hospice nurse today. And she came to join the choir at one point, so I was conducting away. It was actually Haydn's creation, rather appropriately. And yeah, that one.
Very well done. Very well done, sir.
Anyway, Cole's met Gemma, so yeah, it's... I've been married to her for 32 years, and it's been wonderful.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So what happened next after Cambridge?
Fast forward. So schools, all the rest of it. By which time my father had gone through a number of jobs, and there was a bit of a family company up in the north and part of England, in the Lake District. And his family were all ex-Irish, hence O'Brien. But they'd been kicked out of Ireland in the potato famine in the 1840s because we were Quakers. and Quakers and Catholics don't mix too well. Sorry. So we were lucky. We were kicked out. Those who stayed tended to die. So so we found ourselves in the biggest Quaker community even today in the United Kingdom. Is it Kendal in the north of England? And it was an engineering company because Quakers weren't allowed to be part of the professions or anything, part of the institution of England. And so it was just an engineering company. And it went horribly bust just as I got my scholarship to Cambridge. And I got in on English literature and had already I'd chosen to turn down my chance to go off and study the piano in Paris, and suddenly I couldn't pay to get through Cambridge. And so luckily, and this is where luck plays its part for all of us, I had a wonderful director of studies who eventually became the Vice Chancellor of the university by chance, and he said, I can see what's happened. I can see you're thinking you're going to have to leave after 3 weeks, and but if we were to scrap English and go to law, why don't you go back to your local bank manager and see if he'll lend you enough money to come through? Which is what I did, and he said, well, I'm very sorry to see what's happened. What money do you need? And I said £14,000, and he said, well, I reckon it was 12,000. Boy. And we did a deal, and I was, 19, and so I borrowed the money and said I couldn't pay him a penny for 6 years, got my way through Cambridge, became a city lawyer, and then the minute I paid off the loan was the same week I bought my first car, got engaged, and turned down the partnership at a city law firm because I at last had done what I'd done with the law, and I wanted to get to the real world of people and management and industry, and I went off and made roof tiles and bricks and dug quarries and aggregates all over the world in a FTSE 100 company, which I ended up leading in my mid-30s.
Wow.
So it was an unusual thing, but it was great.
So mid-30s, you're leading this company.
Yep.
And
And
then
we're expanding fast into China. We're building factories in China and Australia and Malaysia and Thailand and Argentina and Brazil. You know, it's really going well.
wow.
And we make the roof tiles, which are concrete and clay. And America's a difficult market, so we did lots in Florida and California. We had huge quarrying operations in Colorado and the biggest quarry in the world in Texas, and the calcium carbonate mine in Baltimore. But really, it was the roof tiles of the world across Asia and Europe that we were the leaders of. And in America, of course, you built such very light roofs. This is where's our man? There we are. We built very light roofs. They don't like the heavy concrete, so you do cedar shakes and all sorts of things. So it was a bad market for us. But what that really taught me was, in the end, you're nothing unless you are working with people and you have found the right people. And I heard this somebody else, which in a traditional industry and as a hired hand, not as an entrepreneur, you are in a pyramidal structure, and the danger is you can abuse your position as a manager, because in effect you've got the blackmail of the mortgage. People have to come to work because they've got to pay, instead of building a team where people just desperately want to get out of bed and come and be part of the enterprise and the culture and the sense of forward movement. And good management is actually making sure that you are incredibly, in the end, of course you have to be somewhat empathetic, but you have to be very humble. That really what matters more than anything else is that you find ways of making people jump out of bed in the morning without worrying how much they're paid.
Do you have the secret answer to that?
No. But I think the main thing is if you believe that, then it does govern the way your actions. I mean, this may seem really extraordinary, but the best management lesson I learned, or at least taught myself, was I had a real problem that somebody, when I was in my early 30s, and I'm 61, he was about the same age as I am now, and I had a whole young team of bright people, very similar to you lot, and they just wouldn't go and collaborate and share and talk to him in his office because he had the most terrible body odour, just abominable. And they just couldn't get into his office without retching. So it was really tricky. And I thought, how the hell do I deal with this? I don't want to, I can't tell him off. I mean, he's twice my age and all that. So eventually I called him in and I sat him down, and we'll call him Paul, and I said, look, Paul, I remember that somebody was extremely kind to me once because I didn't realise that I had a problem with body odour. And they told me, and I was able to put that right, and I was able to deal with that, and I'm just using that experience in your case now. And is there anything I can do to support and help you? And well, two things happened. First of all, he burst into tears, and it turned out, of course, he was having problems at home. His wife wouldn't wash his shirts, and blah blah blah. And so it turned out we managed to unearth this whole thing, and he felt supported. And we then had his laundry washed. The whole thing came together, everybody was talking to each other, they were all very happy, and eventually that marriage repaired itself, and it was all because at last there had been some kind of, somebody cared about him. And that was the biggest lesson I learned, was don't confront, do it from a caring point of view, and as I've said somewhere else, always put yourself in the position of the other side of the conversation. And as a musician, I use the phrase, always think about being in the ears of the receiver, not worrying about whether you're playing the right notes.
That's nice. Okay, so it sounds like the company was going well. You were leading it and managing it in your 30s, but you clearly took a different route at some point.
We were just part of a big public company, part of the FTSE 100 in the UK. So we were turning over about 4.2 billion pounds, 27,000 employees across 35 countries, 2,000 factories, and it was a big thing to manage. The only factory I didn't visit was Hawaii, because to come back with a suntan is career death, and so we ended up taking over in a big hostile bid, a company, and that cost $1 billion, and that was a deal I was very much engaged with. And then we were eventually got in a hostile bid, Lafarge Cement, which oddly enough, as we mentioned early on, because we were the world's largest user of cement who didn't make it. So eventually we got done. So I was out of work at the age of 41. So I became an entrepreneur just through a conversation. So I set up a little airline in Sweden, which happened to be a route, and some people got together, and so I became chairman of that, and we ran well for actually about 2 years. But in the meantime, I joined the Conservative Party because a lot of people encouraged me to think politics and thought I'd be good at it. And although I'd started out life during the Thatcher era in what was a new little party called the Social Democratic Party, which eventually died, I'd wanted, partly because my father's business had gone bust and we'd all suffered, I felt that sort of brutal type of right versus left politics was wrong, and I wanted to break the mould. And everybody tried that for about 6 years until eventually trying to be a third party just doesn't work, and we tried here as well. And you end up, because the party machine's so big, you have to make a choice of where you approximate on the political. And I just felt very strongly that you just can't sit on your hands. You either get engaged or you don't, and if you're able to string two words together and you have views which you want to make a difference. And so I made another choice, and I joined the party, and they seemed to think terribly excited that somebody from the real world, who'd had a bit of a real life, who'd come in at a bit of an older age and said, well, so we are really young, wanted to make their career in politics.
What did you bring from entrepreneurship into policy?
Before I answer the policy, even making speeches in the House of Commons, which is, it's a fairly forbidding thing, it's still very much... It's the old church choir stalls, because it's adversarial. You talk at each other. If you're a minister at the dispatch box, as I've said elsewhere, you've got everybody baying for your blood one side and wanting a job the other side, so you're on your own. But it's not like a semicircle where you press a button, it's your turn, prepared speech from your researcher, This is about a debate. Motion is proposed, you stand up, and if you hold a piece of paper to give you a prompt, the whole place erupts like school children, reading. The benches are designed so when you stand up, they're just at that point. So every time you want to make a big point, you're about to tip over. It's a very dangerous place.
It's a very dangerous place.
And there are only 470 seats. There are 600. Can you believe it's 650 MPs? So there are always 200 who can't get in, other than to stand. So it's always looking packed. And And how on earth did I start all that? What was your question?
Maybe the final question, because we're out of time,
Okay,
unfortunately. But I
rescue myself.
would love to hear, like, what did you learn from?
Oh, the entrepreneurial house.
Yeah.
The reason I was going to say is I was the only industrialist. There we are. You see, there's always somebody on the other side of the aisle.
I don't know what that was.
No, the reason I was going to say that is 650 MPs. I was in the House for 16 years, and for the whole 16 years, which I suspect is not dissimilar to some other countries, for the whole 16 years, I was the only ex-FTSE 100 manufacturing or industrialist in the House of Commons. So when I made a speech about risk, management, motivation, cost controls, sadly parting company with people, you know, what it meant, why the 48-hour week under the rigid EU rules would have a major deterrent effect, whether it was on doctors being able to teach their young surgeon students on cut time, but now, I mean, they didn't get the chance because the surgeon needed to get his 48 hours in instead of being able to release some of those hours. You know, all those sort of issues, the rest of the House just glazed over. There was no empathetic shared experience of having come out of the risky world you're in, of betting your life on building something, taking the risk, and if it goes wrong, you could lose it all. And that's very unlike the shared experience of politicians today, many of whom made their careers, or frankly have got extremely rich dads. And that's a bit of a challenge, because it sows the seeds of the diminution of the whole of democracy. So what I found about entrepreneurship is, as a minister, the civil service is there to try and take all risk out of your life. So the idea that policy is going to be at the bow wave, it's never going to be that. It is designed to always lag way behind what's needed for a society to be competitive, or for people to feel that the government is on their side rather than chasing them.
Yeah.
And I think democracies are under challenge now, because a competitive advantage of the horrendous form of government, which is the abuse of dictatorships, is they can stay ahead of their citizens. Democracies, because people want to get re-elected, you haven't got that same level of leadership. You've got followership, because we're now all terrorised by the 24-hour media. Whereas before, if it was just a weekly newspaper column, you could sort of get ahead. And now you just haven't got time.